Hi there. I'm thrilled to be here because I want to talk some realness about the state of modern work. I want to talk about the situation that we've got ourselves into with modern work. Pretty much, the state of modern work is that there's a burnout epidemic going on. In fact, if you look at the stats, half of all office workers are reported to be burnt out. It's even higher for people in public services, NHS. There's a massive burnout emergency taking place. And the thing I want to explain to you is that's a combination of two things underpinned by scientific research. Firstly, the first thing is that we're obsessed with being in the loop. We're obsessed. Human beings have a massive aversion to being rejected, to being ostracized by others. It means consequently, we're always obsessed with trying to be in the loop. And you know the loop, right? So are you in the loop? Is Nigel in the loop? We need to bring Hussein and Laura into the loop. It's that sense that we know what's going on. And human beings have developed, through necessity, this desire to be constantly in the loop. The second phenomenon, which is ongoing, is the fact that we're constantly connected all the time, and it's created massive demands upon us. Work has become this non-stop necessity of constantly being connected. In the last few years, we've seen a phenomenon where there was a joyful day about 15 years ago where email came onto our mobile phones. And it felt like a joyful thing. The rumour went round the office that John had got a BlackBerry. And people went over to John's desk and they tried to work out what combination of words John had used to get this BlackBerry. And everyone decided in that moment that we all wanted a BlackBerry too. It felt like it was going to give us a massive opportunity to free ourselves from the burdens upon us. Little did we know, in that act, the average working day went from 7.5 hours a day to 9.5 hours a day. And that's the problem. We quite often, I think we've learned over the last few years that comparison leads to unhappiness. But you never feel more unhappy when you're comparing your working life to other people's. Because modern work looks amazing in the pictures. Modern work, you see pictures of people sitting on beanbags. They look so happy. You see people coming down slides. You see people cuddling dogs on beanbags coming down slides. But the reality of modern work is a long way away from that. In many ways, modern work is like the embodiment of the Fire Festival. It looks amazing in the pictures, and it's a terrible place to spend your time. We've created this version of work that is completely different to the realities and our experience of it. And the burnout epidemic is starting to have a big toll on people. So burnout, you might know the symptoms of burnout. Burnout is where you, maybe it's emotional exhaustion. You go to bed wide awake. You wake up exhausted. It might be depersonalization. This is where the people around you are way more annoying than they should be. If you sit next to someone and his chewing drives you crazy, you might be showing symptoms of depersonalization. Things that used to be fun aren't as enjoyable anymore. And we're witnessing a massive growth of this phenomenon. The challenge is that this phenomenon of us feeling burnt out and exhausted by work is unfortunately at odds with what I talked about before, that human beings have got a desire that we all want to be in the loop. We want to be connected. We don't want to be estranged from a group. I'll give you one example of how it's being borne out. We've created an environment where, at work, we've prioritized communication. We think someone does a good job when they're a good communicator. We think someone does a good job when they email everyone with an update. But even though we know that that's a flaw, we still are a sucker for fearing being left out. Let me give you an example of this. If you've heard of FOMO, it's got nothing on FOMO. FOMO is fear of missing out on meetings. Let me give you a scenario. You're sitting at your desk. Everyone who sits around you suddenly picks up their stuff and walks off into a meeting room. Palms getting sweaty, starting to wonder, did I miss something? You go and check your calendar. Am I meant to be somewhere? Where are you guys all going? They all wander off. We're convinced, if there's a meeting going on, I need to be in it. You know, we're certain that meetings that we are not part of somehow need us there. And here's the strange thing, that we've weirdly evolved a version of work where the average Brit spends 16 hours a week in meetings. Average office worker spends 16 hours a week in meetings. But I think if the childhood version of you was to transplant into your mind for a day and see what was going on. The first thing they'd observe is that's a lot of meetings. And the second thing they'd observe is that's a lot of meetings where you're really not paying any attention. We've created this environment. Human beings have got such a desire to be part of things that we're overcoming, and we're blocking out the fact that actually we get very little done in these moments of connection. In fact, any of you, if you've ever been fortunate enough to be promoted, will know that you used to longingly look at the meeting that your boss had, that Monday afternoon meeting. That's where the good stuff happens. And you'd watch your boss go to that meeting. You'd watch them come out. What's she doing? What's going on in there? If you ever get promoted and you go to that meeting, you realize meetings are a pyramid trick. That every meeting is as bad as the one below it. I'm convinced that people turn up for their first cabinet meeting and can't believe how little gets done. Meetings are this massive pyramid sales scheme where nothing gets done in them. But here's the strange thing, because I talked to you about the demand that work has become excessively demanding, that there's more and more demands on our cognition. But there's also something, a second part of the science, that really establishes why that's such a burden. And to explain that, I need to introduce someone to you. So this is Robin. And Robin did a really interesting life's work of study, really. He started by studying apes. And he discovered a really interesting thing. Apes spend about 40% of their time, about 4 hours every day, grooming each other. Apes and monkeys just spend hours. The strange thing is, he couldn't work out any correlation. Long-haired apes spend as long as short-haired apes. Apes with lice spend as long as apes without lice. There seemed to be no correlation between why apes were spending this amount of time, till he plotted the size of their brain. And what he realized was that the apes groom a certain number of other apes based on their size of their brain. More intelligent apes groom more apes. Interesting, there seems to be a trust environment that the bigger our brain is, the more we can trust other groups. And Robin was fascinated with what would be the consequence of that if he looked at that, if he extrapolated that evidence and he looked at human beings. So that's what he did. And he discovered this number, which has become known as Dunbar's number. And Dunbar's number is the phenomenon that human beings can only form trusting relationships with at most 150 other adults. And you might think two things about that. You might think, hang on, I've got 700 Facebook friends. I'm not sure that's true. And what I'd say to that is, I'd like you to remember that time, last time you were in Sainsbury's and you saw your next door neighbour and you hid in the pastries department. Because, well, we've got a certain number of friends. What Robin says about this number, he says this is the number that we can form trusted relationships with. These are the people that we could do a favour for. Now, the interesting thing is, it's almost like we've got a finite amount of relationship capital, because introverts, maybe treat it like a bit of face paint. Introverts, they form fewer relationships, but they're more in depth. So the introverts, when they're putting the face paint on people, they're more deliberate, they're more precise. Extroverts just splash a bit on and move on to someone else. They can have maybe 200 trusted relationships. But the challenge of it is that it seems to be strongly observed that we human beings are unable to form more relationships than that number. It brings a consequence then. It makes us start thinking about the way we've engineered modern work. Because the way we've engineered modern work is we've created this environment where there seems to be a strong reward for us being connected to people all the time. It's why the average Brit now sends and receives 200 emails a day. It's why we're spending those 16 hours a week in meetings. We're consumed with trying to connect with far more people than our brain naturally would like us to. And so here's what I'd say, that the challenge is we've created a version of modern work has got this notion of us being in the loop, of us constantly feeling like we need to be connected, we need to be updated on things. And in many ways, it's going against the science of what Robin Dunbar discovered, that we're pushing our brains, we're expecting too much. And so largely what we need to be thinking right now is not how can we be in the loop, but would our working lives be less stressful if we were less in the loop? If we maybe let go a few of these things. Next time someone gets up and goes to a meeting, maybe we say to ourselves, right, I don't need to be part of that. Anytime you find yourself sitting on the sofa answering emails, it's because we've re-engineered work over the last few years to value immediacy and connection over substance and us actually getting our jobs done. When you ask people when they've had a good day at work, they generally give a really clear answer. They've had a good day at work when they've made progress in something substantial. And yet, that's not the way that work has become. Work has pitched us into this situation now where half of all workers are feeling burnt out. The long-term consequence of this is that there will be health impact. It will have a health cost to the services that we take, because pressure and stress is rising to epidemic levels. And it's largely a reflection of those two things. When we're thinking about modern work, we need to think far more about Robin Dunbar's number and really invite ourselves to be out of the loop. The challenge of modern work is we're trying to connect to too many people. It's unnatural, and to a large extent, we need to stop it. Thank you very much.